Shalom, friends. It's great to see you today. Thank you for being here. We know others are going to be trickling in, but we want to start as close to on time as possible. Tomorrow night is the holiday of Purim, and we're excited to have a great scholar here today with us who I had a delightful lunch with her and her husband just a few months ago, and he will be speaking at BPM as well soon. And we're so thrilled to have her on this topic, Behind the Veil, Esther's subtle genius in the Purim story. Let me tell you just a little bit about our speaker today. Rabbanit Shalhevet Cahana teaches Judaic studies at the Jewish Leadership Academy, a groundbreaking Jewish day school in Miami, Florida. She serves as the community scholar at Beth Jacob Congregation in Oakland, California, a position that she has held for 7 years. She's delivered shirim classes and drashot sermons to more than 75 synagogues and campuses in North America, France, and Israel. Additionally, she's a Kala teacher trained by Merkaz Eden in Yerushalayim, guiding couples in mikvah and shalom bayit, marital harmony, in the months preceding their wedding. Rabbanit Kahana previously studied in Maimonides School, Migdal Oz, Stern College for Women, and their advanced Gemara program called the Graduate Program for Advanced Talmudic Studies. I have known her and her family for 15, 20 years when I was a rabbinic intern in Boston, in Newton, Massachusetts. And she's really a delightful person and educator. So please join me in welcoming Rabbanit Shalhevet Cahana. Thank you for being here.
Wonderful. Okay, well, so Boker Tov. It's so wonderful to meet all of you. Uh, Thank you all for coming. I understand that some people may know each other, some people might not. I understand that this is a program from the Valley Beit Midrash as well as Beth El. So if people can share in the chat, where are you Zooming from? And is your connection from Beth El? Is your connection from the Valley Beit Midrash? Let's see where everyone's coming from. All right. Well, it seems like already we're coming in through the miracle of Zoom all over the United States. And I'm coming from Miami, Florida. So this is really rather remarkable that we're all here together. What a treat that we can be here together to learn Torah right before Purim starts. To get ourselves into the Purim flavor, please share your favorite Hamantashen flavor. If you have one, that is. Maybe they're all good. Yesterday, when I was making Hamantashen, I attempted making poppy seed filling, and it was actually really delicious. The trick was white wine with some lime and orange zest. It was rather remarkable. Okay. And because, of course, we are, this is for a Valley Beit Midrash program where Rabbi Yanklowitz has such an emphasis on chesed and social justice. Where are people going to donate for the mitzvah of matanot le'avyonim, giving gifts to the poor? One of the mitzvot of Purim is that we give gifts of charity to those who are less fortunate and need support. So please write in the chat. This is our final get to know you question. Where do you plan to donate this Purim for the mitzvah of matanot le'avyonim, giving gifts to the poor? What's the charity that you believe others and yourself should be donating to? Really beautiful. There's someone in my community who's a Holocaust survivor, and she's 96 years old. So my family and I, we're going to be donating to her. Oh, really beautiful. It's so beautiful to see this. Great. I'm going to share my screen so we can get started with our learning. Here we go. Our goal for today is to get behind the veil and ask ourselves, what is Esther's subtle genius? I'm going to show you this painting by Ernst Normand. And you see this magnificent climactic moment where Esther is pointing her finger at Haman, where she says, Haman hara hazeh, this evil foe, this enemy. Haman is the one responsible for threatening my life and the lives of the Jewish people. And we are so endeared, and we are so grateful to Esther for her bravery. But the question that's guiding our class today is, what did it take to get to this moment? This moment was not random. It was calculated, and Esther devised it herself. And so Esther is often celebrated as the one who saved the Jewish people from a certain downfall. And yet, it's actually much more complex when we ask ourselves how she did it exactly. What's so unique about the Purim story is that there is one being whose name is conspicuously absent. What is this being's name that we don't see even once in the Megillah? A being who we would think certainly should be there. It's God's name. God is not mentioned in the Megillah. And so Megillat Esther is a story, yes, of human initiative, of someone who in dire circumstances is able to mastermind a tremendous win for herself and a victory for the Jewish people. And the religious approach is that it must have been God was marionetting behind the scenes as well, that a series of what seemingly would be coincidences actually was motivated, by someone above, that a coincidence was not random, but rather a planned experience, and that it was Esther who then used her wit and cleverness to enable it to happen. But still, I think from a perhaps more rational point of view, we have to ask ourselves, does the Megillah give us hints or to tell us how Esther was able to do it? That is our question for today. There is an idea that we learned from Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our father, that we actually learned from Megillat Esther. It's Kol ha'omer davar b'shem omro, mevi ge'ula le'olam. Anybody who says something they learned in the name of the person who taught it to them brings ge'ula to the world, brings redemption to the world. How do they know that? From something in Megillat Esther. Because Esther told Achashverosh about Bigtan and Teresh's plot to kill Achashverosh, not in her name, but in the name of Mordechai. Vatomer Esther Vamelech b'shem Mordechai, because she gave attribution. Eventually, it enabled Achashverosh to, after several years, say a public thank you to Mordechai, the one who deserved that thanks, which we will see is very critical for the narrative. So, of course, I need to communicate that many of the ideas you're going to be learning today are my own original ideas. And all the more so I want to give credit where credit is due. I've been very influenced in my understanding of Megillat Esther in this particular question by Rabbi David Foreman, Rabbanit Shalhevet Cahana, and Rabbi David Silver. For additional reading beyond this class, I hope this piques your interest to learn even more. Rabbi David Foreman has an unbelievable book on Megillat Esther called The Queen You Thought You Knew. And please read it after this class. It elucidates all these topics much more deeply. Okay, so if you're Esther and you're told it's your job to save the Jewish people, what do you say? What do you even do? So Esther has every reason to actually not put her life at risk. How so? When Esther is approached by Mordechai, originally Esther demurs. Mordechai has gone out into the streets. He's vayizak za'aka gdola umara. He lets out a great and bitter cry. But how does Esther respond to Mordechai's grief and his public cry? How does she react? What does she send Mordechai? She sends him a new set of clothing. She's apparently unaware why it is that Mordechai is in grief. Eventually, Mordechai has to send through a messenger to Esther what's actually going on. He communicates, Esther, the Jewish people have their entire nation at risk. And Esther, you have a job to do. I need you, lavo el hamelech, I need you to go into the king, lihitchanein lo, to appease him, umilvakish milfanav alama. Esther, I need you to stand up for the Jewish people. So Esther hears Mordechai's plea for action. And how does she initially react to his plea? Does she say yes or does she say no? Guess what? You have a 50-50 chance of getting it right because it's a yes or no question. She's like, well, what happened last time that someone tried to defy a rule of the king? If I try to go into the king unannounced, that would be breaking the rules. And we know what happened last time. Who else broke a rule of the king and it didn't work out so well? Vashti. So Esther says, Kol avdei hamelech v'ha'am yodim, everybody knows that even women and children, kol ish ve'isha asher yalavo lamelech, if you go into the king's palace unannounced, achatato lahamid, the king will kill you, levad, except me'asher yoshit lo hamelech et sharvit hazahav v'chaya, unless the king happens to put his scepter on you, in which case you could live. And Esther says, listen, Mordechai, va'ani lo nikreti lavo al hamelech zeh shaloshim yom. I have not been asked to come before the king for the past 30 days. It's very nice that you want me to, save the Jewish people. But Mordechai, don't you realize that if I go in to see the king, I could die? Now, in terms of a halachic question, it's a reasonable question to ask. What degree of personal risk is someone willing or someone should allowed to take on in endangering their own life to save another person's? Judaism generally believes that, chayecha kodmein lechayecha vercha. Usually Judaism believes that you have to prioritize your own life over another person's. When Esther's saying, listen, Mordechai, I'd love to help you, but I'm out, there is a substantial argument to make to support her view. But Mordechai then tells her one of the most striking arguments and beautiful psukim in the entire Tanakh, where he says in Esther 4:14, Esther, Kim hacharish tacharishi ba'ed hazot, for if you are silent now, you could choose to do that. You could justify and stand behind this belief of, I don't want to be the defiant queen who, winds up like Vashti. You could do that. But more, Esther, we don't even need you. Ravach v'hatzala yamod la Yehudim mimakom acher. I am certain that safety and salvation will come to the Jewish people from another place. What's this other place? Maybe it's Hashem. Hashem is sometimes referred to as a makom. What's another option? The place maybe is Eretz Yisrael, that the Jewish people will always have safety and security for ourselves in the land of Israel. That is also a second possibility. But Esther, I'm worried about you. The reason why you need to get involved and save the Jewish people is because I'm worried about you, Esther. It's at uvetavich tovedu. It's you and your father's house will be lost. And when we say at uvetavich, remember, Mordechai is speaking to an orphan. She's the last in her line. If she doesn't continue her legacy, it actually stops her father's legacy and her entire family's legacy as well. It is not only retrospective, thinking about the past, we also know it is prospective, thinking in the future as well. That if Esther doesn't save the Jewish people, would there even be a Jewish people? Would there even be future generations of Jews? And so, Atu ve'tavich tovedu, Esther, you have the chance to save everyone. Achashverosh's kingdom is vast, the entire known world. And this genocidal maniac of Haman runs the risk of ruining it all. And Mordechai asks her, Umi yodea, who knows? Im la'ed kazot higat lamalchut. It was for this moment that you have achieved royalty. Our greatest question of our lives is, what is our tafkid? What is our purpose in our world? People can spend years of their life yearning, searching to discover who they are. And in Mordechai asking this rhetorically, he's highlighting for Esther the series of what could have been happenstance events, but is saying maybe there was a marionetting being, God, who was putting it together. Who knows if why Vashti was dethroned, why you happen to be chosen as queen, that you've been sitting as queen for the past 5 years, basically doing nothing. And then all of a sudden, this is your moment. And Esther takes bait. And what Esther then does is she transitions from being a passive character into being the one who directs the narrative, which is why we can call this Megillat Esther. We can attribute this book to her because she's no longer the passive one, Vatilakach, someone who was taken against her will, or someone who was only taking orders from Mordechai. No. Now in this shift, this is the first v'na'afochu, right? This first turning on its head, Esther goes from passive to active, from someone who's managing fate into creating her own destiny. And she says in Esther 4:16, Lech, go, knos et kol haYehudim hanimtzeim b'Shushan v'tzumu alai. Gather all the Jews in Shushan, fast for me. Al tuchlu ve'al tishtu shlosha yamim. Don't eat for me, don't drink for me, night and day. Gamani v'na'arotai atzum kain. Me and my maidservants, we will fast too. Uvachein avo el hamelech asher lo chadad. And I will go into the king, even though I will be like Vashti. I will be the defiant queen. V'chasher avadati avadati. And if I will die, I will die. I need to point out two aspects of this pasuk. The first is Esther asks people to do what? She asks for them to fast. Why does she ask them to fast? This fast is meant to rouse them to do tefillah and to do teshuvah. Notice just how different this is from Achashverosh. What did Achashverosh do? Achashverosh, when he wants to get people to like him at the very beginning, Achashverosh makes a huge party for everyone, all of his officers for a whole 6 months, and then a huge party for all the people of Shushan. Achashverosh is someone who uses his position of greed, of wealth, and vanity so that people can join his side and want to be close to him, to win friends and earn their favor. But Esther is the opposite. Esther knows that there is truth and meaning and purpose behind her position as royalty and in her attempt to save the Jewish people. Not only does she not need to wine and dine everybody in the Jewish people, in fact, it's the opposite. Whereas Achashverosh had a grotesque, vulgar, overly opulent party that was this never-ending party, Esther said, we don't have to do feasting. It's now time to swing to the opposite. It's time for fasting. So already we see a contrast in Esther and Achashverosh's approach for how to earn support of people and in the way they govern. And the second, I think I want to point out about this verse is the specific use of language. Notice how when Esther is speaking here, she says, Ka'asher avadati avadati, and that which I've lost, I've lost. Why is this important? Notice how this word la'abed appears. First, it appears when Haman sends the edict to the entire kingdom of Achashverosh in chapter 3, verse 13, lahashmid laharog ul'abed et kol haYehudim, to destroy, massacre, and exterminate all Jews. So he's using the word la'abed as synonymous with his genocidal intent of killing and destroying the entire Jewish people. Mordechai very specifically uses that exact same word when he's motivating Esther to change her mind. Ve'at uvet avich tovedu. If you don't act, I'm worried about you because you and your father's house will be also tovedu. What he's telling her is don't assume that just because no one else knows you're Jewish and you'll be physically alive means that you'll have somehow circumvented Haman's decree. No, no. To be a Jew is not to be alone. To be a Jew means that you are an individual among a community. And he uses the word tovedu to imply that while her physical body will be alive, she will have spiritually died, because it is not our intention as Jews to live alone as the singular Jew. We don't meditate alone on mountains endlessly. We pray in community, joining together our individual desires among others who come to support us. Eventually, Esther then takes that same word, tovedu, and then plugs it and then says it when she says, Ka'asher avadati avadati. Going back to that first definition, and if I am to die, I will die. She understands that her fate might wind up being what Haman had decreed. She understands now that in this Pascal's wager, is it better to believe in God just in case God exists or not? She's now reorienting her Pascal's wager and saying, well, either I am physically alive but dead if I don't do anything, or I might die trying. Either way, it's a type of death. Ka'asher avadati avadati. If I'm to perish, I shall perish. But now she's decided, I'm here to act. And that's an extraordinary thing we see with the string of the use of the word labed. What's extraordinary is that after this 3-day fast, Esther then comes in on the third day, Vatilbash Esther Malchut. She comes in into wearing royal apparel, Vata'amod b'chatzar Beit HaMelech HaPnimit, and she goes into the king's inner court of the king's palace. Nochach Beit HaMelech, facing the king's palace. The Hamelech Yoshev al Kisei Malchuto, and the king is sitting in the royal throne. The Beit HaMalchut, in the throne room. Nochach Petach Habayi, facing the entrance of the palace. Now you may have noticed that I italicized a shoresh, a root word. What is that root? It's the word hamelech or malchut, king or royal. How many times does it appear in this verse? Well, malchut, hamelech, hamelech vehamelech, al kisei malchuto, beit hamalchut, 6 times. 6 times. This is perhaps because the most common word in the entire Megillah is the word melech. It appears no less than over 270 times. It is asking, who's the real king? Is it Achashverosh who's going to be marionetting all the events? In the pshat, the context here is we're referring to Achashverosh. But is there really Hashem marionetting from above? And Esther is going to be trying to swing Hashem in Hashem's favor so that eventually she can succeed. Notice, by the way, that she is wearing her royal finery while fasting and going into the king's inner chamber and sees the king on his throne. What does that sound like? Rabbi Chaim Angel suggests that this sounds very much like Yom Kippur. Because on Yom Kippur, we have the Kohen Gadol, the holiest person, going to the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the holiest place, on the holiest day. And what does the Kohen Gadol do there? He pleads on behalf of the Jewish people, and that is exactly what Esther's doing. So when Esther goes in, what is she supposed to ask for? Well, from Mordechai's perspective, she should just go in and ask, hey, Achashverosh, I've got a dilemma. Don't you love me? Why don't we save the Jewish people? Is that an effective strategy? No, Esther realizes that Mordechai's version, just go in and ask for what you need, and he'll give it to you. Esther realizes that's not going to get her anywhere. Why not? Because Haman did something that was certainly unethical, planning for the explicit genocide of an innocent people just because you have some sort of megalomania needing Mordechai to bow down to you is disturbing and not compelling, of course. But no matter how immoral it was legal. Haman did go about it in a certain correct path, in the same way that, say, Jim Crow laws were legal, and in the same way that the Nuremberg laws were ostensibly legal. Law and morality do not always overlap. And so Esther realizes just merely asking will not be enough. Instead, Esther needs to find a different way. And it starts here. Vatomer Esther, Imel HaMelech Tov, if it's good in the eyes of the king, Yavo HaMelech v'Haman Hayom, El HaMishteh Asher Asiti Lo. Can the king and Haman come to the party that I've prepared for him? Now, what's wrong with this sentence grammatically? How many people are invited to the party? 2. How many people is this party for? Him. The feast that I have prepared for him. That's singular, not plural. And so you're Achashverosh, and maybe you give the impression that you're a blithering idiot, but Achashverosh can't be that stupid. And so Achashverosh is asking himself, Esther invited me and Haman to some intimate party just for the two of us, and yet she's saying the party is really for one of us. What is Esther actually doing? This is Esther's intended goal. She is one who is casting doubt. As long as she can get Achashverosh to hang on and hang on and hang on, she's going to get under Achashverosh's skin and hopefully he'll give her what she wants. And so eventually at this party, Achashverosh then says, "No, tell me what you want." He's been waiting all day. What does she really want? What does she really want? What does she really want? And what does she ask for there? Uh, can I have another party? Why does Esther ask for a second party? It's possible, option one, that Esther really did intend to ask right then and there with Haman and Achashverosh for the Jewish people. And perhaps, in the view of one Rishon, she clammed up and she wished to, but she wasn't able to. The second view is that Esther knew it wasn't yet the right moment. She hadn't gotten Achashverosh to be really frustrated enough to really know what she wants. And so it's possible then, according to the view of another Rishon of the Ibn Ezra, that it was a intentional strategy to say, you know, Achashverosh, you know what I want? I want a second party of the two of you. Wink. Of course, Achashverosh knows that there's something else lurking beneath the surface. And he says, sure, but he's now dying to know what it is that's going on. So why is it that that night Achashverosh can't sleep? So the view of Rabbi David Silber is that he cannot get this off his mind. What in the world is Esther after? This is so unusual. Well, you know, the last time Esther entered my palace unannounced was to tell me that Bigtan and Teresh had an assassination attempt against me. And so Achashverosh goes back in his diary. You know, instead of a lullaby, he's reading his diary. And he goes back to this moment of when Bigtan and Teresh attempted assassination, and Esther, through Mordechai, was able to save Achashverosh. There too, she went in unannounced. And so Achashverosh is rereading this episode. And while it's being read, Achashverosh said, you know, I never really said thank you. What have I done to say thank you to Mordechai? And so without any knowledge that there was a noise outside, Achashverosh says, wait a second, who's outside? So we know that Haman was already outside, eager to ask Achashverosh, hey, I have an idea. Let's hang Mordechai. I know we already had this lottery, and we already have this plan to kill all the Jews in 12 months. But you know, I'm just so eager to kill Mordechai right now. Do I have permission to please kill Mordechai right now? That's why Haman is lurking there. His wife Zeresh said, come uva boker, come in the morning. But Haman is so eager. He has rizut. He has a certain alacrity. And he's already there waiting, waiting, waiting. But why is Achashverosh asking? So maybe he heard Haman walking around. But I think another view, says Rabbi David Foreman, is that Achashverosh is paranoid. Wait a second. What if Esther and Haman, what if they are kind of like Bigtan and Teresh? Last time I was killed, Bigtan and Teresh, they were planning an assassination attempt against me. And what if they are trying to do that? Now, this goes even one step further. Achashverosh's mind starts to spiral because if Haman and Esther are in cahoots with each other, then maybe their relationship is even deeper. So says Rabbi David Foreman, Esther was creating these intimate parties with wine just for the three of them to get Achashverosh to wonder if she was having an affair. And so what we have then here is something really, really extraordinary. Whereas before, when we suggested that Esther says Ka'asher avadati avadati, the traditional way of understanding it is Esther saying, I might die because I'm going into the king unannounced. This is true. She passed level 1 when Achashverosh did put the scepter on her head. But what we now realize is that Esther was willing to put the thought in Achashverosh's mind that she had done an act of adultery. Of course, she had not. But the very fact that Achashverosh could be suspicious of this would then make a reasonable ground for Achashverosh to then assassinate her and Haman on the grounds of suspected adultery, which would certainly be against the law. So what we're seeing then is that Esther was on a kamikaze mission that was much more complex. Because what Esther was realizing is that I don't know how far I'm going to get in marionetting the situation to get under Achashverosh's skin. I'm only going to get as far as I'm going to get. If I get only to the point of coming into Achashverosh's palace and I don't even make it that far, then maybe that's it. I know I've tried. If I'm able to get as far as having a party with him to get him to suspect about the adultery, I've gotten that far, and maybe I'll die at that point. I think the big surprise of the Megillah is that Esther was able to succeed in getting past each one of those hurdles so she could make it through all the way to the very end, which is rather extraordinary. Of course, what happens um, after the king hears that it's Haman who's lurking outside, and the king asks Haman, so what should I do to say thank you to Mordecai? Um, Haman then describes, you should say thank you to this individual, thinking it was, of course, himself, by saying this person should go out in the king's throne, excuse me, on the king's crown, on the king's horse, wearing the king's clothes, and be paraded around town. What is this, of course? It's a coronation. And so Haman had basically revealed that even though his initial desire was to hang Mordecai, his deeper desire was to become king himself. And now Achashverosh can no longer justify keeping Haman around. Therefore, when Esther eventually at the second party, Achashverosh says, "No, spill it. What is it? What do you want?" Then Esther reveals that she's a Jew. She then reveals that Haman is the one responsible. So why does Achashverosh get rid of Haman? Maybe it's because he cares about Esther. It's possible. But it's largely probably because Achashverosh cannot have an advisor to the king who wants to become king himself. But notice that when Esther reveals her Judaism and declares Haman to be her enemy, how does the king react? V'hamelech, Esther chapter 7, verse 7, V'hamelech kam b'chamato mimishtei hayayin. The king in his fury left the wine feast, El Ginat Habitan, for the palace garden. Why is it that the king had to leave? It is possible, says Rabbi David Silber, that Achashverosh was confused. And he just needed a moment to sort out his mind and figure out what's up and what's down. This is a v'nahafochu moment. Everything's turning on its head. I thought, thinks Achashverosh, that Esther and Haman, that they were perhaps committing adultery together. I had assumed that Esther and Haman maybe were attempting an assassination attempt against me. But wait a second, Esther actually wants nothing to do with Haman? That is so shocking. At this point, it should be clear to Achashverosh that Esther wants to have nothing to do with Haman. Further, this could also, in this absence, this is an idea from one of my students at the Jewish Leadership Academy. His name is Raphael. Further, by leaving Esther and Haman together, it's calling Haman on his bluff. Haman is supposedly wanting to kill the entire Jewish people. Go ahead, Haman. You think you want to, kill all the Jewish people? Can you really do that? And so Esther stays inside. Haman stays inside. Achashverosh is outside. So then, upon returning back into the room with the party, Achashverosh sees a scene with sexual innuendo, where Haman was actually falling on the bed to plead for his life. But of course, it perhaps looked sexual in appearance. And so Achashverosh then, his hidden suspicion becomes revealed as well. And he says, Hagam lichbosh et hamalka imi vavayit. Does he mean, meaning Haman, to ravish the queen in my own palace? Basically saying, what, are you going to now sleep with Esther with me here? Indicating that all along, Achashverosh had been surmising in his head what was going on. It's rather remarkable what happens when we make connections or we tell ourselves stories that may or may not be true, but so long as they can remain true in our minds, we can tell ourselves those stories. And so this can be seen as a proof, says Rabbi David Foreman, that Esther had been quite successful in getting under Achashverosh's skin and convincing him that Esther and Haman had something going on together. I will close with this. There are many lessons we can take away from this, but I think it should be clear as follows. Achashverosh is ultimately the protagonist of the story. It's a story that begins, Vayhi b'yamei Achashverosh, and the story ends with Achashverosh's tax plan. As I said earlier, the most common word in the entire Megillah is the word Hamelech, the king. This is a story about a king who's rather evil and amoral, doesn't really care if genocide happens in his kingdom. When given the chance to revoke a law of genocide, he refuses. This is not necessarily a great person, Achashverosh. And this is a story of how precarious it can be to be at the whim of some tyrant like Achashverosh. Esther had every reason to say no. And yet, when she eventually rose up, she did not have to win favor in the way Achashverosh did. In fact, what she shows us is a model of moral responsibility, of Mesirut Nefesh, that it is worth the risk, even if you're acting alone, if you have the chance to save the whole Jewish people. So Esther's willingness of self-sacrifice for the sake of others is extraordinary. And no matter how much power, greed, or money Achashverosh is flaunting rather consistently in party after party after party in the story, power and greed will only get a leader so far. It is rather Esther's wit and Esther's brilliance that earns her such a high regard in the hearts of all the Jewish people. Whereas Achashverosh manipulated others to bend to his will, Esther had no reason to flaunt. The parties that Esther's make were not to manipulate in the way Achashverosh did. It was rather a strategy for how she could swing Achashverosh into her favor. We should never forget then the value of just one person. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says, "B'makom she'ein anashim, hishtadel lichot ish." In a place where there are no men, strive to be a man. Or as my teacher, Dr. Yael Ziegler says, "B'makom she'ein anashim," in a place where there's no men who can act. Tishtadel lihiot isha. You should strive to be that woman or that person who can make all that difference. Never underestimate the power of one person and their choices. I will stop here, and I will open up the floor to questions, reactions, and of course, rebuttals and other comments.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. Yes, we would love to open it up to questions. If anyone would like to ask a question or make a comment, please feel free to raise your hands and we can call on people to unmute. You can also write things in the chat as well. Hi, Gigi. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. I had always thought that Esther from the very beginning takes charge, because Mordecai is saying everybody's sitting around in sackcloth and ashes, but they're not doing anything. And the first thing she does is say, everybody should fast and pray for me, fast for me. And it's bring the community together, give them something that's active for them to do. And fasting is that it's like a traditional thing when you want to change something.
Yes.
So from the very beginning, Esther is taking charge. I thought that was awesome in the story.
Absolutely. So what you're saying is true, that when Esther makes a deliberate decision that she is going to stand up and do her very best to save the Jewish people, she'll try or die trying. We do see Esther rise up and taking action, and it is very powerful that her approach is lech kenoset kol Yehudim, having the mutual support of other fellow Jews in times of trouble is incredibly important. And so that is very beautiful. However, before she makes this decision, before then, she is a passive character. First, she was an orphan, so she was under the tutelage of Mordechai, her cousin. The Midrash does imagine Mordechai and Esther to be a married couple with a significant age difference. I could elaborate on that as well. It's a rather interesting Midrash that's really quite fascinating to imagine if Esther and Mordechai are in fact a married couple and not merely cousins. And when, while she's, in the harem or in her first part of her queenship, she's just following Mordechai's rules. Even when she's selected as queen, she continues to follow Mordechai's orders. Mordechai was telling her, you should hide your Jewishness. It's likely that Mordechai told this to her as a means of enabling her to become queen as a strategy. See, Esther, by presenting as an orphan, by presenting as someone who has no background, as presenting as someone with no nation, and hiding her Jewishness, it leaves her as like a blank slate. And perhaps Achashverosh was specifically looking for that. And so Esther followed the rules. She didn't mess around. This is what Mordechai asks me to do. I'll do it. It actually says it no less than 2 times in the second chapter. And so what's amazing here is that Mordechai, through convincing her, we see Esther rise up in this extraordinary capacity she always had. But it was, desperate times call for desperate measures. It encouraged her to really rise up.
You wanted to elaborate on that midrash that Esther and Mordechai were a married couple. That would be interesting. I haven't heard that before.
Sure. So in the pshat, in the simple interpretation of the text, Esther is introduced as he Esther bat Dodo. It's actually said from the perspective of Mordechai. This is Esther, the daughter of his uncle. So the daughter of your uncle is your cousin. That's so people often get confused. They say, Mordechai's the uncle. That's not true. The text does not say that. It's that the daughter of the cousin, a daughter of an uncle, therefore cousin. So, that's the pshat. But there is a midrash that suggests that no, they actually were married. So every midrash has a serious basis for why it says it. It is a big mistake to call midrash fan fiction because it's rather degrading. Of course, it is like fan fiction, and that fan fiction is taking the basis of the narrative. And of course, it is being extremely creative with it. So in that sense, it is like, I guess you could call it fan fiction. But the reality is, says Rabbi Asaf Ben-Narsh, that the midrash is omek pshuto shel mikra. The depth of the real pshat can be elucidated through a midrash. Every midrash has significant pshat hooks, has real narrative basis to underscore and support what it is that the text is really saying. It's very impressive. So what then are the pshat hooks that could communicate that Esther and Mordechai are married? So the first is that you have this pairing of Esther and Mordechai where it's functional. They treat each other like equals. He gives her directives and she follows through. And then they work together as a team and they have clear communication. That is the positive. But if you contrast Esther and Mordechai to the other couples in the Megillah, the other ones are toxic, dysfunctional, cannot communicate well, and are therefore a foil. What I'm referring to then is Achashverosh Vashti, Achashverosh Esther, and then Haman Zeresh. Those are the 3 other couple pairings. And so the first hook then is if you say, well, Esther and Mordechai, maybe they were married too, and they were just a different foil than these 3 other couples. Further, what's really interesting is, and this is with the Midrash, this is a little, I guess maybe we should say PG-13 or rated R. The Megillah is a book that is quite different for children than it is for adults, because children, of course, see Achashverosh as some bumbling idiot, when the reality is he's quite evil. They see this as a story of, people being, Haman being some very silly, and then we just eat this as, and we have a carnival, and it's very fun and goofy. But the adult version of the Megillah, of course, is that this is a very complex narrative of good versus evil, right versus wrong. And of course, the adults can see the explicit sexual overtones that underlie pretty much everything. So another pshat hook that I think is rather extraordinary is after party number 1, and after Haman parades Mordechai around town, the text of the Megillah tells us where Haman goes. Where does Haman go? He goes home. He goes home to his wife. And so where does Esther go? Esther doesn't say, but the Chazal assume that in that blank empty space, maybe in that lacuna, Esther and Achashverosh were together. So the Gemara Masechet Sanhedrin says something really extraordinary, where the Gemara wonders whether at this moment, Esther actually was willing to renounce her marriage to Mordechai. How so? Whereas before, Esther was an unwilling participant with Achashverosh. She was taken against her will to the harem. She didn't even necessarily want to be queen. And then when Esther and Achashverosh were together, the Gemara says, Karka Olam Haita, she made herself like earth. It is possible that she did that so that she could remain and retain her marriage to Mordechai. This is the suggestion of the Gemara Masechet Sanhedrin. It's speaking about the mitzvot that are ye harig ve'al ya'avor, the mitzvot where one should be killed rather than transgress. However, here, perhaps in this missing lacuna, with Esther actively choosing to be with Achashverosh, perhaps this would actually make Esther into a tragic character, because at the end of the story, she still has to remain married to the crazy guy. The rest of the Jewish people are saved, but then she's stuck with Achashverosh. So this is all to say that this reading of Esther being married to Mordechai has enormous consequences for Esther personally. The rabbis see enormous halachic consequences based on this one possible midrash that transform Esther into being actually not only a heroine, but also a tragic character still stuck at the end of Achashverosh.
Thank you. Very interesting. And you can learn about all of our upcoming classes and events on our website. Thank you very much.
It was so special getting ready for Purim with you. Have a great day. And of course, a Chag Sameach, everybody.
Thank you. Chag Sameach.